Mr. Daryl Swanepoel. Are we ready for coalitions?
When we go into this election, our polling is telling us that we are going to have, after May 29, coalition governments in South Africa.
How ready do you think we are for an ANC-DA coalition?
If it's a pure coalition based on politics,
Welcome back to Palatable Politics, a show where we take the complexity out of politics and make it palatable for you. With me, your host, TJ Maslela. Welcome to the show. In today's session, we're going to be discussing social cohesion, economic transformation, and a little bit of inclusive coalition. And here to give us insight is the CEO of the Inclusive Society Institute, Mr. Daryl Swanepoel. Welcome to the show.
Hi, good to be with you.
Can you give us a bit of a breakdown as to who you are, your journey, and how you became CEO?
Well, sure, that's a long story, and we've only got a short time, So, but basically,
make it palatable.
In short, I got into politics in the late 80s with the National Party at the time. Went to Parliament first the Gauteng Legislature and later in Parliament following the 1994 elections. Ended up as the last Secretary General of the National Party. And, in 2005, we merged. The National Party merged with the ANC. And I joined the forces of the ANC and worked in the Luthuli House for 16 years, running what was called the Progressive Business Forum at the time. But in 2019, I think started to look at things a little bit differently. And I think there was a realization that a lot of the policy proposals that were coming out of the political establishment were not necessarily always founded on empirical research. And especially there was a gap in the field of social democracy. There's many research institutions looking at economics and social transformation through the lens of liberal democracy, not so much social democracy, and therefore we established the Inclusive Society Institute, which is an independent institute. We are a non-profit organization. We are not aligned to any political party, but we do our work through the lens of social democracy. And as such, we work with political parties that define themselves as social democrats.
One of the things I know you're very passionate about is social cohesion.
Yes.
Can you walk us through it? One, what it is, and two, what you guys are doing?
Yeah, social cohesion, it is nation building and reconciliation, essentially. And I'm very worried about the level of social cohesion in South Africa. Post 1994 elections, the Mandela era, there was a euphoria, the new South Africa. We defined ourselves as the Rainbow Nation. But systematically over the years, social cohesion has moved down the priority list to the point where it is not in a good position as we sit here now. On the surface, maybe. Once you start digging a bit deeper, you find there are problems. Now, social cohesion, working together, living together, being a nation, is not a nice to have. It's not a soft issue. It is about the economy. If you do not have a social cohesion in the country, forget economic growth. What do we define as social cohesion? First of all, it's about demographic integration. To what extent are the various race groups of the country socializing with each other? Going to dinner with each other, visiting each other, braaiing with it. To what extent is that happening?
Including interracial relationships, right?
Sure. The second element of it is your sense of connectedness to the country. Where do you see the future for yourself and your family? Is your future in South Africa, or when the popo hits the fan, are you going to be on the first plane out? And now that speaks to the economy because it's your skills and your capital that you need to retain in the country. And the third element of social cohesion is your sense of community. To what extent are you involved in your community? Are you in your school governing board, working in the church, helping uplift your community? And that's important in the sense of when there is trouble in a community and you are upset about something and you want to and there's protest action, for example, if you have got an interest, if you are involved in your community, you're not going to burn down or destroy the infrastructure. You're going to be there protecting it. So those three elements are crucially important. Now, where do we stand in South Africa? We do extensive polling. We call it the GovDem poll. It's done through Ipsos. It's done every year. And what we have found is that the levels of trust in the country are actually shockingly low. Less than 50%, when you ask them the question, do you believe we can build a united South Africa amongst the various groups in the country, racial groups in the country? Less than 50% believe it is possible, which is worrying, and that is across all racial groups. It's marginal differences that you get. Trust between different people from a different religion than you.
Yeah.
Also shockingly, a real shocking figure is that 2/3 of South Africans distrust immigrants. 2/3.
Immigrants, do we differentiate between those from Africa and those from outside of Africa?
We actually asked the question in the poll. We asked the question from Africa and from outside of Africa. And actually the result is more or less the same. This year's poll is going to be a little bit different. We are going to say from Africa, from the West, and from the East.
Okay.
Because there could be different sentiments towards people from Asia as opposed to people from South America, from Europe. So it's a bad picture, but there is a silver lining, and that is when you ask the question, do you want a united South Africa? 70% plus say they want that. 70% plus. So there's this divide between what people want and what people believe is possible. And that is the area that we need to address.
The 30%, without being pessimistic, what demographic is that?
You know, let me tell you something. It's across the board as well. Unfortunately, I don't have it here, but it differs in terms of blacks not trusting whites or whites not trusting blacks. It is marginal difference. It's across the board, which is actually quite shocking if you think about it. 30 years into the new South Africa, there's still a 30% that distrust people from other racial groups.
Would you say that? Well, from the stats, I don't know if you guys have asked, but is there trust between blacks and whites? Does it filter through there?
Let me tell you something. It's very interesting. Blacks don't trust blacks. Whites don't trust whites. And even if you and the same word, let's not forget the Indians and the coloureds as well, you know. Even families, the trust levels amongst families are not that hot either. White people trust their families slightly more than the other races trust their families.
So how do we take that 70% of people that want to unite and move towards uniting and building social cohesion?
Well, the first thing that we are busy doing is we are busy developing what they call a South African Social Cohesion Index. And what this Social Cohesion Index does, it actually measures and develops the trend line as to what is happening to social cohesion in the country. Is it improving? Is it regressing? Is it staying the same? So that we've got empirical evidence to see that the interventions that we do, are these interventions having an impact or not? We'll be able to measure that going forward. It's a long-term project. We are currently busy with a project where we're looking at how do other communities, diverse communities, manage diversity in their society. We've gone to Singapore, for example, where in Singapore they have what they call the Presidential Council for Minority Rights and the Presidential Council for Religious Harmony, and the main thrust of those councils is to look at every piece of legislation that goes through Parliament. Does it impact various racial groups, and to make sure that the legislation that is passed does not feed division. Then another country that we'll be visiting soon is the United Arab Emirates. Interesting there, they have a Ministry for Tolerance and Coexistence. Because there you have the diversity. There is it's a Muslim country, but there are only 2 million Emirati and something like 9 million people outside of the Emirates, from Pakistan and Bangladesh and expats from Europe, etc., etc. So how do you get these communities to live in harmony with one another? Another country which we will be visiting is Finland. Finland, believe it or not, they have the Swedish People's Party of Finland, because Swedish People's Party of Finland, because there's 6% of the Finnish population are Swedish speaking. And they also have the Swedish Assembly, where all the members of parliament from the various parties that are Swedish-speaking get together. And that's mainly focusing on ensuring that the language rights are protected and that the language is developed, etc. And they have the non-discrimination ombudsperson that makes sure that there's no discrimination that takes place in the country. And then, of course, we will be also looking at one of the African jurisdictions, and there we're possibly looking at Tanzania. Or another interesting example may be Rwanda. Remember the Tutsi division, and they seem to be working well together as a nation. So we can learn from those societies. But the main thing is two things in South Africa. The narrative is not nation building. The narrative, to a large extent, drives wedges. When we talk about white monopoly capital and black economic empowerment and all these sort of things which that are not packaged correctly or conveyed correctly, it creates anxiety. Like, for example, we're just talking about the decolonization of education. And the way that it could be portrayed is when it is let's decolonize education, it creates a sense of not fury but anger, maybe amongst a portion of the community. And in the minority community, it creates a sense of maybe concern. Is there a future for us in the country? Are we, that narrative needs to package correctly. So we are actually got a project going, which we'll do this year, is say, yes, decolonization is necessary. It is necessary. But what will a decolonized education look like? What is the end result? Because when we know what that end result looks like, you must probably find, there's going to be little opposition to it. Okay?
Because that, I assume, one could also use the 4IR, etc., also as a catalyst.
Yes.
To have an inclusive education system.
Yes. So I would rather sell it, being the Inclusive Society Institute. I would not sell it as decolonized education, but I would sell it as inclusive education.
With a positive.
Yeah. Where for example, traditional medicine, okay, has a lower ranking spot in society. It's all Western medicine. Let's build the traditional medicine. As far as I know, there's the University of the Western Cape do offer some qualifications in traditional medicine and that. But that needs to be expanded so that it can live side by side with one another. If you look at, for example, in China, Chinese medicine and Western medicine, they live side by side and have equal status in China. Language. Let's not have. Let's not just have English and Afrikaans as scientific languages in the country. Let's build the other languages. Let's look at our history. Let's not wipe out the colonial history. Let's tell the full story of South Africa by adding to it and ensuring that the full picture is portrayed. So that's why my vision of decolonized education is inclusive education. And if one then gets that end product and you sell it, you know what? I think you will have little opposition to it.
One of the main points you mentioned, which is responsible for us not having social cohesion, largely spoke to the economic factor, which brings us to economic transformation. How should we go about it?
It's interesting. We've got some stats which show that if you look at the labor absorption rate, that is the number, the relative number of people that are employable, that are employed. It was in the mid-50s in 1994 when the new government came in, and it's improved to the mid-60s. So affirmative action and black economic empowerment is definitely assisting with that transformation that's taking place. But on the other side, talking about social cohesion, on the other side, there are those that are now saying there's not a future. White people, colored people, Indian people, saying there's not a future for us. We've been driven out. Affirmative action is driving us out. But the labor absorption rate for the white community has improved by 1.5%. From a high base, but it hasn't declined. It's actually improved. So what are we saying? Affirmative action, black economic empowerment is uplifting the black community without negatively impacting the white community in reality.
And the land component of it, have you guys done any research around that?
We haven't done much work into the land question. I would say that we want to look at what is the real distribution of land. Is it still as skewed as what it is stated, or is it very much like the Johannesburg Stock Exchange? There are some protagonists which would say that 90% of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange is still in white hands. That's not true.
What do the numbers say?
About 10% of the stock exchange is in private hands, of which 90% is in white hands.
90% of the 10%.
90% of the 10%.
Okay.
So that's what is said. Okay, and then that comes to the 10%, but that's actually only 1%. Okay.
Okay.
Of the total, or 9% of the total. 39% more or less is in foreign hands. So that you have to exclude from the equation. The rest are institutional investors.
Your PIC.
Your pension funds.
Yeah.
Your pension fund, my pension fund. And the majority of pension fund contributors are black. I asked the question to a very, very, very successful businessman once. I asked him and said, but can that be true? Because if you think that the minority communities, the white people specifically, have been contributing to the pension fund for many, many decades, it's only the last few decades. So surely they've built up a lot of capital. And he said there's two things you must remember. One is those people have died. Many of those people have died.
Okay. And
secondly, salaries have increased at a much dramatic rate. So they were making small contributions, and the salaries have increased dramatically over the last 30 years. So that has a major impact of it. I think that the white community, without having the stats before me, are still in a better position than the black community. Let's not fool ourselves. But things are improving in the country. It's not getting worse.
Now, going into the political element of it, you guys have done some research around inclusive coalitions in SA. Are we ready for coalitions?
Well, if you look at Johannesburg and Ekurhuleni and Pretoria or Tshwane, then the answer is clearly no. Okay? Because I don't think the glue that holds coalitions together is policy. The glue that holds holds coalitions together is power. And I don't think that, or retention of power rather. And I don't think that the politicians are driven by finding coalition partners that we can develop a common manifesto on. It's built on how do we keep the ANC out. And then you get, for example, if you look at the role that the EFF plays as kingmaker, they cannot form a cohesive program with the multi-charter, for example. There's just too many major policy differences, and then when you go into government, they put demands on the table which you cannot find the cohesive position, and that's when things break down. When we go into this election, our polling is telling us that we are going to have, after May 29, coalition governments in South Africa. The jury is still out as to whether at the national level we'll have a coalition government. Our last polling showed that the ANC could possibly get a majority on their own, if not, slightly under. And therefore it would be relatively easy to find a coalition partner that shares your basic policy proposal. We are expecting polling in the next week or two, and things could have changed, because a poll is a snapshot in time, and we didn't measure the impact of the MK party. We know that the MK party is going to get some support. To what extent that support is going to be, we'll know in a week or two's time when we do the prediction. But the chances are, at the national level, it'll be easy to put a coalition, relatively easy to put a coalition together, or even the ANC govern with their own majority. But certainly in places like Gauteng and in places like KwaZulu-Natal, there will be coalition governments. And our latest stats show us that it'll be very difficult for the ANC to put a coalition together without the EFF, but equally difficult for the multi-party charter to put a coalition together without the EFF. So the chances are that the EFF will play the kingmaker, and then one will have to judge how mature is our democracy. Are we going to proceed with what we did at local government level and put power as the objective and enter into a coalition with a partner that's going to give us a difficult time and make a government unstable? Or are we going to just step back and say, listen, we go into opposition and we play our role as opposition partner? That we'll see. I don't think we are there yet.
How ready do you think we are for an ANC-DA coalition? I know there have been whispers there.
Yeah, there have been whispers. Talking about social cohesion and inclusivity and so forth, I very much like the idea of a government of national unity. And I'm pretty sorry that as a nation we walked away from the government of national unity concept. But if you're going to bring the DA into such a coalition, let's rather look at some sort of government of national unity concept, which might make it easier for opposing parties to actually get together in government. If it's a pure coalition based on politics, it's to a large extent a marriage of convenience that will take place then. So I'm not against the DA and the ANC going into a coalition. I'm not against that. I would just want to expand it and bring other parties into that configuration as well.
So more a thing of, instead of coalitions, just everyone working together.
Yeah. But real world politics. The DA, the multi-party charter, in fact, are campaigning out there on a never the ANC ticket. Never the ANC. How are you going to face your electorate after and say, listen, we said never the ANC, but, circumstances tell us. Okay. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, I don't think politics has matured enough in South Africa that we focus on the policy. We still focus on the man. We are playing the man, we're not playing the ball in our political narrative in the country.
How are we going to get South Africans to vote, and how important is it?
There are two things there. The first thing, only around 2/3 of eligible voters are registered, of which in the last election, for example, the ANC got around 57.5%, which means that the national government is governing at the pleasure of less than 30% of eligible voters in the country. In the local government election, they are governing at the pleasure of less than 15% of the population. So, because 2/3 of the eligible voters are registered, of which only around 60% vote. So less than 50% of eligible voters actually end up at the polls, which is problematic. And then we talk about, and that speaks to, is our democracy credible? The other element of it is the voter registration. And we are pushing for automatic voter registration. So instead of having to register with the IEC as a voter, and if you're not registered as a voter and you pitch up at the polling station, they turn you away. We say, use the population register as the voters roll. Every person over 16 automatically comes onto the voters roll. So if you decide at the last minute you're spurred on to go and vote, you can go to the polling station. They can't turn you away because you're on the voters roll.
That makes sense.
So those are the two areas that we are promoting in terms of voters. So get out there and vote.
So now, anyone that wants to find out more about your guys' research studies or how to get involved, how do they go about it?
Well, we've got quite an extensive website, which I know you've looked at, www.inclusivesociety.org.za. And there we show all our activities and all our reports. We do work in 3 domains or areas. One is socioeconomic policy development, policy research and analysis. We also work in the field of democracy, human rights and constitutionalism, with a focus on constitutionalism. And there's a lot of work to do in this country on constitutionalism. I mean, just look at one aspect of it, participatory democracy, which is being ridden roughshod over in the country. And one can just mention Gauteng e-tolls as an example of participatory democracy ignored. Then we have disasters like the Gauteng e-toll. And then the third area that we are looking at is international cooperation. And there it is in 2 fields. It's in the field of international solidarity with social democratic thinking in the world, but then also looking at multilateral reform. How does Africa in the broader sense, but South Africa in the narrower sense. But how does Africa get a fairer and more rightful place within the multilateral order? And there's some exciting work we're doing there around the establishment of a Global Resilience Council, because, the United Nations, the elephant in the room is reforming the Security Council. It's not going to happen in my lifetime because I can't see the P5, that's America and Russia and China, and giving up their veto power. So let's look at two areas. Let's say, okay, retain the veto right, but write rules around how you can exercise that veto right. And then establish a Global Resilience Council to deal with non-peace and security issues, climate change, environment, poverty, hunger, refugee relief, etc. So those are the areas we're working with, and as I say, it's all available on our website.
On point 2, with regards to the Constitution. The Constitution, our Constitution in its current form, is it drafted or articulated in a way that is conducive for the development and growth of the country?
Yeah, I think we have most probably the most progressive constitution in the world. Progressive in the sense of social justice. There's very few constitutions around the world that make the right to housing and the right to a job and that written into the constitution. Of course, it must be seen in what it says. It says the progressive realization, systematically moving towards it. There is very little wrong with the Constitution. And the problems that we are picking up is not because of the Constitution, but that the Constitution is not being adhered to. They're riding roughshod over the Constitution. Then they say the Constitution is inhibiting us. It's not. They are not carrying out the vision of the Constitution.
Okay, well, solid. Thank you for making time for us, giving us insight. And once your guys' research is out after the elections or so, we're going to hopefully have another conversation and go deeper in. Good. But thank you.
And then we'll see how correct our predictions are. Something like an economist. Economist tells you what the economy is going to do, and when it doesn't do that, it tells you why it didn't do it. So let's hope we don't fall into that. Yeah.
But yeah, we'll see. But thank you.
Okay.
Guys, thank you for tuning in. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, share, tune in, same place, same time. Oh, don't forget to vote.